They called it the season of giving, but that winter felt like the season of pretending. The lights twinkled on the porch railing just like every other year. Soft white bulbs wrapped around cedar posts my late husband once painted himself. Inside, the scent of cinnamon pine cones and wood polish lingered in the air, and I'd just finished hanging the last ornament on the tree. A little wooden heart carved with our first home, 1974. It had always been my favorite. I stood back and looked at the tree, my hand still holding the ribbon. The fireplace crackled behind me, and I heard faint footsteps upstairs. Jason and Mara's laughter drifted down the staircase, muffled but carefree. I didn't smile. Couldn't. They'd been staying with me since late August. A temporary thing, Jason said, after he lost his job and Mara left hers for her mental health. I didn't mind at first. He's my son. I raised him to believe that family supports family, that we take care of each other when times get tough. But somewhere along the way, the warmth turned cold. At first it was little things, Mara leaving her coffee mugs in the sink for days, rolling her eyes when I asked her to rinse them. Jason ignoring the mail piling up under his name. Some with red stamps I chose not to ask about. Then came the louder arguments between them, followed by whispers I was never meant to hear. Until that night. It was 3 days before Christmas. I'd made cocoa for myself and gone to place the mug by the window, watching the snow swirl under the porch light. I remember clutching the heart ornament in my hand, the same one I'd hung every year since my husband passed. My fingers traced the edges of the carving, a small habit I'd kept when I missed him most. That's when I heard them. The bedroom door creaked open upstairs and Jason's voice filtered down like a draft. We'll kick her out after Christmas. Give it a week and tell her we're selling the house. Say it's for financial reasons. Then Mara, sharp, dry and cruel, she'll cry for a bit. Then she'll move in with her church friends or something. Old people always land soft. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My feet stayed rooted on the rug by the window, the cocoa untouched beside me. I felt like I'd been dropped into icy water. Kick me out? I had opened my home, my kitchen, my heart, again and again and again. I'd cashed out a portion of my small retirement fund last year to help Jason cover credit card debt he never paid off. I watched them redecorate the guest room with her furniture, hang her photos, and still I told myself it's okay. It's just for now. I thought of my husband, how he built this home with sweat and scraped knuckles, laying the tiles in the kitchen himself while humming Johnny Cash. I thought of the nights I paced the hallway with a colicky Jason in my arms, whispering lullabies into his tiny ear. And now here I was, old, quiet, and disposable. I walked to the tree and gently placed the ornament back on the lowest branch. My hands were steady, my face calm, but inside something shifted, something settled. I would not wait to be discarded, not after Christmas, not ever. I turned off the tree lights, took my cocoa and walked quietly to my bedroom, heart thudding louder than the storm beginning to build outside. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself they would never take what I built. And this would be their last Christmas in my home. The next morning, the house was filled with that artificial cheer I'd grown to dread. Christmas music played softly from the speaker Mara had synced to her phone, and she walked through the kitchen in one of my old sweaters, one she never asked to borrow. She smiled at me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been plotting my eviction just hours before. "Morning, Edith," she chirped. "Coffee's cold, you might want to reheat it." I simply nodded, taking my mug without a word. Jason wandered in shortly after, still in pajama pants, yawning like a man without a care in the world. He had my late husband's chin, but none of his grace. I used to tell myself he was just overwhelmed with life, that maybe he'd soften with time. But I saw it now. That softness in me was being used against me. They weren't staying with me to get back on their feet. They were nesting, digging in, claiming what they never built. After breakfast, I walked into the study and sat by the window. The snow outside had stopped falling, and the sky was that dull gray you only see in December. I opened the bottom drawer of my old roll-top desk and pulled out a thin stack of yellowed papers, the house deed, the loan clearance letter from 1993, and a photo of my husband on the day we poured the foundation. His jeans were covered in cement dust, and he had this crooked grin on his face, like he'd just conquered the world. We worked so hard for that little plot of land, saved pennies in coffee cans. He worked overtime at the factory and built furniture on weekends. I babysat neighborhood kids to scrape together enough for the plumbing. I still remember the moment he handed me the keys and said, "This is yours too, Edith. No matter what happens, this house is your home." And now our son, our only son, was planning to take it from me like it was a used couch. I stayed there for a while, fingers brushing the edge of that old photo. Then I placed everything gently in a manila folder and locked it back in the drawer. I didn't cry. Not then. But I did remember. I remembered how Jason called me 2 years ago, voice shaking, saying he needed money for a business investment. I wired him $14,000 from the last of my savings. He never spoke of that investment again. I remembered how Mara once laughed with her friend on speakerphone and said, "Edith's sweet. But she's from a different time. She thinks having a house makes her powerful." That one stung more than I'd like to admit. I remembered that Thanksgiving, just weeks ago, when they sat across the table and Jason asked if I'd thought about estate planning yet. Mara chimed in with a smirk. "It's just smart, before things get messy." They weren't asking out of care. They were setting the stage. The thing about getting older isn't just that your joints ache or your friends pass on. It's realizing how invisible you've become to the people you once held in your arms. That night, I took out the photo albums from the hallway shelf and sat cross-legged by the fireplace, flipping through page after page. There was Jason, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. There I was, arms around him at his graduation, eyes red from crying. I paused on a photo of him with his father, building the swing set in the backyard. My husband's hand rested gently on Jason's shoulder. "You take care of her when I'm gone, all right?" He'd said that week in the hospital. Jason nodded at the time. He was 34, a grown man, but promises, it seems, don't last long in a world of entitlement. Mara came downstairs briefly and gave me a tight-lipped smile. I told her I was organizing photos for Christmas. She looked bored and wandered away, mumbling something about watching a Christmas special in bed. I waited until I heard the door click upstairs before I carefully opened the desk again, pulled out the deed, and dialed the number on the card tucked inside the folder. My husband's old lawyer, Peter Langston. Retired now, but his son ran the practice. "Hello, this is Clara Langston," a kind voice answered. Cleared my throat. "Yes, hello. I'd like to discuss selling my home," quietly. As soon as possible, I didn't sleep much after that phone call. Not from nerves. No, it was something else. A calm. The kind that only comes after months of being ignored, disrespected, or quietly erased. I had finally stepped back into myself. I felt it in my bones, steady and certain, like the way morning sunlight creeps in before the day knows it's begun. Clara Langston was quick, professional, discreet, and respectful. She called back that afternoon with a plan. "Given your location and condition of the house, we can get a cash buyer. No contingencies, no inspections, all closed before New Year's. We just need your signature and a few disclosures." Her voice was warm, but brisk. No small talk. I liked that. I gave her the go-ahead. I said I'd come into the office the next morning. I hung up and sat still for a long time, listening to the muffled sound of Jason and Mara laughing from the back porch. Probably watching videos, maybe browsing vacation rentals they assumed I'd never afford to visit. My name was still on everything. The deed, the utilities, even the security system they never bothered to learn to use. The next day, I made up a story about running errands and took the bus to the Langston firm downtown. The office was quiet, tucked between an old tailor shop and a closed-down bakery. Clara met me in the front, mid-30s, bright green eyes, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She walked me through the paperwork with a gentleness I didn't expect. You'll have a 3-day escrow period. Then the buyer will take possession. We can schedule a locksmith for you the moment it closes if you'd like. I smiled. Yes, I would like that. She looked up from the paper and nodded just once, like she understood more than I was saying. When I returned home, Jason was in the kitchen eating the last of my cinnamon rolls. He handed me a piece of mail like he was doing me a favor. Mara was sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barking at a customer service rep on speakerphone about some missing return. I watched her for a minute, saw the way she referred to herself as the homeowner to the person on the line. You know, we really need to get some fresh paint in here before spring, she said later, glancing around the living room. I bit my tongue. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking through me. That night, I began clearing the things that mattered. Not loudly, not suspiciously, just quiet movements. The photo albums. My husband's war medals from the drawer in the hallway. The small music box he gave me the Christmas before he passed. One by one, I placed them into a modest suitcase, wrapped carefully in scarves. The hardest to pack was the ornament, the wooden heart from our first year in the house. I held it in my palm for several minutes, feeling the slight splinters at the edges where time had worn the varnish thin. I thought about where I might hang it next, somewhere peaceful, somewhere where silence meant comfort, not tension. Dorothy was the only one I told. She was my best friend for over 40 years. And when I showed up at her back door that evening with tea and a small bag of lemon cookies, she knew something was off. "You've got your careful face on," she said, setting down her knitting needles. I told her everything, every word I'd heard, every detail of what was coming. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she took a long sip of tea and said, "I have a guest room. No strings." I squeezed her hand, but shook my head. "I won't need it long. Just a few days until the locks change." She raised an eyebrow. "Edith Holden. I never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I said. "But here we are." The next few days moved fast. I signed, notarist, confirmed with Clara. The Bayer was a family relocating from Colorado. Young couple with 2 kids. They loved the brickwork, the backyard, the fireplace. They didn't try to haggle or delay. They just said, "It feels like a home." I liked that. I think my husband would have too. Meanwhile, Jason and Mara remained in their own world, baking messes they didn't clean, ignoring me unless they wanted something. They had no idea that the ground beneath their entitled feet was no longer theirs to stand on. By December 24th, Christmas Eve, I had packed everything I needed into 2 suitcases. My clothes, my memories, my worth. That night, they left for a Christmas party at Mara's sister's house. She didn't invite me. "You wouldn't enjoy it," she said, breezing past me. "Lots of young people." She didn't know that was the last time she'd walk out that door with my keys. I stood in the kitchen after they left, placed a folded note on the counter and laid the spare keys beside it. Then I zipped my suitcase shut and walked out the back door, leaving the lights on and the tree glowing behind me. The locks would change by morning, and they would never see it coming. There's something sacred about silence at night on Christmas Eve. The snow had started falling again, soft and slow, like it didn't want to be heard. I stood at the curb with my suitcase, watching the flakes settle on the branches of the maple tree in the yard. The same tree Jason once climbed as a child. The same one his father had hung a tire swing from, long before cell phones and sarcasm ruled his voice. I took one last look at the porch lights, twinkling, steady, and I let my breath curl out into the cold air before stepping into Dorothy's car. She didn't ask questions, just reached across and gently patted my hand. "You sure you're all right?" "I will be," I replied. Earlier that evening, just before they left, Mara had left dirty dishes on the counter again. Cranberry sauce crusted on the plate, turkey bones still in the pan. She had the nerve to say, "Oh, Edith, we're running late. Do you mind cleaning this up?" I stood there in my cardigan, dish towel in hand, and just nodded. I wonder now if she took my silence as obedience. I suppose she always had. Jason had kissed the top of my head awkwardly on his way out and said, "Merry Christmas, Mom. We'll be back late. Don't wait up." No hug, no warmth, just that empty tone I'd learned to expect from him over the years. Once their car pulled out of the driveway, I moved fast. I walked room by room, scanning for anything I might have missed. A locket in the bathroom drawer, a copy of my will in the hallway cabinet, a cardigan I always wore on bad days. I didn't take much, just what mattered. There, on the mantel, was the little wooden heart, the one that started it all. Our first home, 1974. I took it down gently, wrapping it in a scarf and placing it in the side pocket of my suitcase. Then I turned and walked to the kitchen, where I'd laid out the folded note on the counter beside the spare keys. The note read simply, "You were guests in my home. You mistook that kindness for ownership. The home is no longer mine, and neither is it yours. Merry Christmas." Next to it, I placed a legal envelope with a copy of the finalized sale and transfer. When Dorothy and I arrived at her house, she insisted I sleep in her spare room. I protested, but she only smiled and said, "It's Christmas. You'll sleep, and in the morning the world will be different." She was right. At 7:30 a.m. on Christmas Day, Clara called. "The transfer is complete. The buyer's funds have cleared, and the new owners will take possession today. The locksmith is en route now to replace all access points, as requested." I thanked her, and one more thing, she added. "The buyer asked if you left the tools on purpose. Said they looked hand-forged and wanted to know if you meant to gift them." I smiled. Yes, I did. At 9:04 a.m., while I sat with Dorothy sipping tea by her bay window, my phone rang again. Jason. I let it ring. He called once, then twice, then 3 more times within 10 minutes. Dorothy looked over the rim of her mug, one eyebrow raised. "You gonna answer that?" "Not yet." By the 6th call, I muted the phone. An hour later, Mara texted, "What the hell is going on? We can't get in. There are strangers inside." I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through the photos on my phone and found one I'd taken last night before I left. The Christmas tree glowing softly in the living room, the ornament nestled in its usual spot, my suitcase just out of frame. A goodbye, quiet, unannounced. Later that afternoon, Dorothy and I took a walk through the neighborhood. The snow had stopped, and the air was crisp, almost biting. When we passed a small playground, we paused at the sight of a young boy helping his sister build a snowman. Their parents stood nearby, laughing. It reminded me of a time that felt like someone else's life. "Do you regret it?" Dorothy asked gently, linking her arm through mine. No, I said without hesitation. The mistake wasn't helping them. It was thinking they'd remember who helped when they didn't need me anymore. She didn't say anything back. She didn't have to. That night, just before bed, I checked my phone again. 12 missed calls. 8 new voicemails. One text stood out. You can't do this to us. Where are we supposed to go? But the truth was simple. I hadn't done anything to them. They did it to themselves. I just decided not to stay and watch them finish the job. Jason told the story later. To friends. To coworkers. To anyone who would listen. I heard fragments of it through the grapevine, each version angrier than the last. We got home from a Christmas party and our keys didn't work. Can you believe that? On Christmas night, he always left out the part where the house wasn't theirs. According to Clara, the locksmith arrived at 10:03 a.m. on Christmas morning. He was met by the buyers, the Harrisons, a young couple with 2 small children. They'd flown in from Denver and were thrilled to spend their first Christmas in their new home. They brought coffee for the locksmith, introduced themselves to the neighbors, unloaded a few essentials from their SUV. By the time Jason and Mara pulled into the driveway that evening, red-nosed, hungover and exhausted, the porch lights had been switched out. A new wreath hung on the door. Jason tried the key. Nothing. Mara jiggled the knob, then knocked hard. Still silence. Then the door opened, but not to them. A man mid-30s, wearing a world's best dad sweater, stepped out with a confused smile. Can I help you? Jason blinked. This is our house. My mother's house. The man looked over his shoulder, then back at them. You mean the house we just bought? He held up a folder. Clara Langston. Closed yesterday. Mara stepped forward, panic creeping into her voice. There's some mistake. Edith didn't say anything about selling. She didn't have to, the man replied, still polite. She owned it outright. Jason looked stunned, like the wind had been knocked out of him. She can't just... we lived here. The man's smile faded, and his tone changed. None of you stayed here. There's a difference. And then he closed the door. They pounded on it for a while, but it didn't reopen. Mara tried calling me again. Jason sent a string of messages that veered between confusion and rage. What the hell did you do? Where are you? This isn't legal. You can't throw us out. We're family, for God's sake. I sat in Dorothy's guest room, my phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't need to look. I already knew what they'd say. What surprised me was how calm I felt. No shaking hands. No tears. Just a kind of quiet resolution I hadn't felt in years. The next day, Jason left a voicemail that started with a desperate tone and ended with fury. You know how this makes us look. We've got nowhere to go. You embarrassed us. You didn't even give us a chance to fix things. But I had. For months. I gave them chances when Mara forgot to say thank you. When Jason rolled his eyes at me mid-conversation. When they spoke in whispers they thought I couldn't hear. When they started referring to the house as theirs, right in front of me. They'd had more chances than they deserved. By New Year's Eve, they had moved into a budget motel on the edge of town. I only knew because Mara posted a vague complaint on Facebook. Some people will pretend to love you just long enough to take everything. Watch your back. The irony didn't escape me. What they really missed wasn't me. It was the comfort. The free meals. The utilities in my name. The unspoken agreement that I would always be there. Invisible. Quiet. Helpful. They'd mistaken kindness for weakness. And now they were learning the difference. Dorothy and I spent that evening in her cozy living room, watching an old black and white film, sharing spiced cider and laughter. I hadn't laughed like that in a long time, not without guilt, not without looking over my shoulder. When the clock struck midnight, I whispered a simple prayer. Thank you for the clarity, for the courage, and for the silence that finally feels safe. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail, forwarded from my old address. It was from the Harrisons. Inside was a photo of their 2 children standing in front of the fireplace, holding stockings with their names stitched on. Behind them, the tree twinkled with new ornaments, except for one. At the center hung an old wooden heart. Our first home, 1974. Below the photo was a note in careful handwriting. Dear Ms. Holden, we found this ornament and knew it had meaning. We left it up, just for the season. Thank you for this home. We promise to fill it with love. I closed the letter, held it against my chest, and smiled. For the first time in years, I felt like something sacred had been returned to me. Not the house. My dignity. I wish I could say they took it with grace, that they sat down and reflected, that they looked inward, realized what they'd done, and offered some heartfelt apology for the months, years, really, of manipulation and entitlement. But no, people like Jason and Mara don't grieve what they lose. They rage at who took it. 3 days after New Year's, I got a text from an unknown number. We're meeting with a lawyer? You'll be hearing from us? I read it over tea, one slipper kicked halfway off my foot. I didn't even flinch. I didn't reply. That same afternoon, Clara called me. Jason Holden showed up at our office, unannounced, demanded to speak with my father. I wasn't going to mention it, but he was aggressive. Let me guess, I said. He thinks I stole something that was already mine. She chuckled lightly. Don't worry, Mrs. Holden. Everything is airtight. The deed, the sale, the transfer. All by the book. He can throw a tantrum if he wants. It won't change the law. I thanked her and hung up. I felt a slow, steady heat of satisfaction blooming in my chest. Not revenge, not triumph. Just relief. For once I was protected, and no one could take it away from me. Later that week, Mara made a public Facebook post. Started off vague. Something about being betrayed by someone who raised you. But by the 3rd paragraph, it got nastier. Imagine letting your own flesh and blood sleep in a motel while you hand over the family home to strangers. Some people aren't just old. They're cruel. Friends commented with fake concern. Others chimed in with what really happened. And are you okay? All posturing. No truce. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence says more than the truth ever could. Then came the final attempt. A voicemail from Jason. 1 minute, 42 seconds long. Mom, we need to talk. This has gone too far. You've embarrassed us. Do you even realize how this looks? I told Mara this isn't like you. That something's off. Maybe you're confused. I mean, who sells a house on Christmas Eve without saying a word? If this is about something she said, I can explain. He paused, sighed, then added, just call me back. We can fix this. I listened to it twice. Not once did he say, I'm sorry. Not once did he say, thank you for everything. Not once did he say, I was wrong. Just embarrassment, control, deflection. As if I was a broken gate that needed to be fixed. That night, I pulled out the old letters my husband wrote me in the first years of our marriage. We'd never had much money, but he'd always scribble something sweet on the backs of receipts or paper scraps. If you ever doubt it, you are the reason this house feels like home. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, and I finally let myself cry. Not for them. For me. For how long I'd waited for someone to see my worth. For how many birthdays and holidays I'd spent putting out fires instead of candles. For how long I'd stayed silent in the name of keeping peace, when all it did was keep me small. Dorothy knocked gently on my door, just as I was folding the letter away. "There's a delivery for you." I raised a brow. Delivery? She handed me a package. Plain brown paper. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo frame. A screenshot. Mara's public Facebook post. Followed by over 100 comments beneath it. Except someone had replied with a single sentence that went viral. Imagine living in someone's home, eating their food, and planning to kick them out. Only to be shocked when they leave first. It had over 2,000 likes. I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes from deep in your stomach when something absurd finally collapses under its own weight. Someone out there saw it. Understood it. Said it. And said it better than I ever could. By the end of January, Jason and Mara had moved to another state. Nugoodbis. No warning. Just vanished like a bad draft. Dorothy and I drove past the old house a few weeks later. The Harrisons had planted new shrubs and added a small bench beneath the maple tree. Their kids were playing catch in the yard. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. I realized something. Standing there watching them laugh. That house wasn't my final chapter. It was theirs. And I had no interest in reading it anymore. Some people imagine freedom as something loud. Cheers, champagne, suitcases flung open in airports. But for me, it was a quiet morning in February. I stood on the porch of my new cottage, wrapped in a soft gray shawl Dorothy had given me, sipping tea while the sunrise stretched across the frozen lake like a silk ribbon unraveling. It was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a fireplace that needed coaxing. But it was mine, paid for in full. No strings. No footsteps overhead. No slammed doors. No whispered betrayals behind hallway walls. Just stillness and space to breathe. I didn't decorate much. A few framed photos, my husband's toolbox in the shed, and the wooden heart. Our first home, 1974, hanging beside the back door. A new place, but I still carried the love that built the last one.